Good day. In my case, morning. I'm a cannabis patient here in Florida. Um, I've been part of the registry since about December of last year, so I've been in there for about a year now. Um, I have an autoimmune condition that causes a bunch of inflammation throughout my body, specifically my joints and um, my bowel areas. I've been lucky in that I haven't needed surgery yet, but I've done the routine patient stuff like colonoscopies and endoscopies and all that fun stuff. Um, I was fortunate enough to discover cannabis about 6 years ago in my on this path of wellness, as I like to call it. Unfortunately, I had to take a lot of bad stuff before I truly appreciated it for all it could do for me. So for a while I was getting active in the community and trying to promote passage of Amendment 2 as we intended it, as the people, you know, as constituents that voted it in this year, and attempted to in the midterm the year before that, but that was our fault for going in the midterm, I think. Um, Spreading the message about what it can do for other people as well as what it does for me. And it can be kind of troubling, but I think that patients like me that went out and did that and got people thinking and talking about the fact that their neighbors and friends were getting help from something that they didn't have safe access to. There's been times where I went to go get my medicine from the black market and people have pulled guns on me. Of course, there's been times where people just tried selling more than they had to offer or that they had offered, but that's been a thing for decades. You hear stories in the 60s and 70s about hippies getting, bricks with nails and, shoes and all kinds of crazy stuff in them. Not to say that that's acceptable. And we've made a lot of progress in making sure that people are getting safe cannabis products. On the topic of that, I'm not so fond of what's available in stores right now. The only thing that seems to work for me is the edible capsules that some dispensaries offer that have distillate in it, but that just makes sense. It's typically cut with some kind of cooking oil. Trulieve does multi-chain triglyceride. I believe it was, I'm not sure, there's another store doing olive oil and then another I believe doing canola, as well as utilizing grapeseed oil and those kinds of things, which is always fine. But the way that they offer the distillate is interesting in itself. I think that as soon as they open up actual edible products, it'll be beneficial to everyone involved. Because right now they just seem to offer this, what they consider to be a cost-effective product. And if you're using it as they intended, I don't know about other patients, but for me, I go through it in a couple days, which doesn't make it much cheaper than the black market, honestly. in fact, even more so, which is unfortunate because the black market, the herb, and even concentrates, if you're into that, are a lot more effective in the whole plant form. And I know a lot of people understand that, and patients that are just getting introduced to that. I hope you aren't dissuaded by the efficacy of what you're paying for, because it does and can work for a lot of people. It's just what's sold in stores is quasi cannabis, you know. The entourage effect is a very real thing, or ensemble, or whatever you want to call it. Um, and I applaud Trulieve. Actually, I think 2 quarters ago, they released a product, an herbal cannabis product called Entourage. It was, as far as I know, a whole flower. I unfortunately wasn't able to get it because it was too far away from me. And I was tight on money at the time, and couldn't wait for the delivery, which at the time also had a $25 fee. Um, that was just a mess. If you can go to a dispensary in person, that'd be best, because most of the delivery patterns don't work. It's not same day. In my location, for example, I had to wait for Tuesdays and Thursdays. So if I had an issue over the weekend, I would be stuck over the weekend unless I had another option. And that's unacceptable, I think. Um, the availability of this should really be increased to meet demand. There's a lot of storefronts by the same license holders going up, and I think that's acceptable in looking long term, but a lot of us don't have long term. I'm fortunate in that I'm young, relatively. I'm only 24. Um, but I put in a lot of effort every day to try and stay well, Um, and I'm not going to be able to do that forever, but cannabis helps me do that. Um, and I've noticed a lot of seniors in these stores when I go to my local Trulieve, because now it's within driving distance, I guess, 40 minutes, um, one way. But a lot of the people that I see in there are seniors or elderly people, suffering from arthritis and a lot of the things that I suffer from as well. Um, and they seem to be getting relief. So, to those of you that are getting relief, uh, I'm thankful that you are, and um, I encourage you to keep doing that if that works for you. To those that are worried that it might not work for them, or have noticed that it doesn't work for them, I encourage you to stay hopeful. Um, change will be coming. It takes a lot of, hopefully not a lot, but it takes a couple brave people to kind of shake things up and let people know what's going on. So one of the big things in availability that also bothers me, aside from how far storefronts are for some people, is price. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. In one of the inter one in the beginning of this whole process, one of the license holders held an interview, or spoke up at a public meeting, I believe held in Tallahassee, and she was there to answer questions that some of the representatives had. And one of the biggest issues was price, and the license holder argued that in other states they utilize the leaves of the plant instead of the flower for producing their concentrate product or their products in general. Um, and I really didn't like that argument for a couple of reasons. First off, it shouldn't be about what part of the plant that you use. Bottom line, it should be about cost to produce. If you're in a position that you're processing a plant, making a distillate out of it, you should be using all of the resin that you can, in my opinion, whether that be from extremely trichome dense sugar leaves or the flower itself. It really should not matter. Fan leaves or water leaves, that's a completely different story, and that isn't really part of this discussion. But cost to produce should not be even giving, a margin of profit and all of that things. I would imagine that if you are doing that kind of profiting margin, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but it seems like they're making use of the fact that they're license holders, that they are able to do what the black market is doing, but in a legal way. I don't find that acceptable. I think that, all of these legal and constitutional obstacles aside that we keep getting thrown in our face as patients, and the feet dragging along the way in Tallahassee and by our representatives that know fair and well that in every single district the vote towards Amendment 2 was over 60%. In some places as high as 80. We clearly want this. We, at the time, voted for cannabis and access, or cannabis access for patients. That meant complete cannabis access. At the time, we utilized the definition that was put in the Florida rule books, which was that cannabis was described as all plants, all parts of the plant from the genus Cannabis, including the resin and seeds thereof. And for whatever reason, when they went and did Senate Bill 8A, they went and changed the definition to cannabis, marijuana, marijuana sometimes called cannabis, cannabis sometimes called marijuana. And then made sure to say explicitly then, after that fact, that only the treatment centers were allowed to grow, which isn't constitutional. The Constitution was intended for patients, not license holders. Patients are intended to have access to this plant, not people that are in a political position to grow. And especially here in Florida, we have a glorious sun above us almost year round. The only issue we would really have garnering a light source that would be free and unreplicatable is the few times that we have cold fronts. As long as you allow for adequate airflow and um, a, um, a, a an equalization in moisture, you know, so that things are great. That's the only issue that you have. You don't, as long as you're on top of pruning, which fundamentally, if you think about the way that you would prune a tree, the way that you would prune a tree, well, maybe not you, but well, perhaps you, but people that are practiced in tree pruning, the way that they would prune a tree, if you translate that to cannabis, except accounting for its incredibly rapid growth time and all of the rules involved in pruning, um, you don't have issues with airflow. As long as you're not covering it with crazy things, you don't have issues with making sure that humidity is right. As long as the plant is started in the ground, the moment that it breaks its seed, it starts adapting to the environment. Um, you know, within its genetic potential, its possible genetic potential. It's not going to do things it's unable to do, but it can be pressured to do things that might have not been observed before. Um, but just for example, here's some flowers. This is a Jenny Kush. You'll notice that a lot of these flowers are very slender. What I have noticed is some of your Afghani varieties this is a Ghost Train Haze. A lot of your Afghani varieties are a little bit more dense, and the leaves are more broad. They can hold moisture very well. Afghani varieties that have smaller flowers, which are um, for some people a little more difficult to work with. Like if you appreciate every plant, it's not hard. But if you're someone going for yield or someone going for specific qualities, it can be kind of disgruntling, I guess. Um, to compare some of the weights put off by varieties in some regions versus others. Um, so with that said, what I have noticed is a lot of the equatorial based varieties and um, varieties that are kind of close to the equatorial line do very well outdoors. Typically, you don't have issues with pruning, uh, you know, even after cutting. Um, the only real issue lays in how long it takes for them to flower, and in some of the varieties nowadays, the flowering time is down, you know. Um, so it's just something to keep in mind, especially here in our tropical state, we have access to rain. As long as you make sure that your soil isn't bare and covered, what lays underneath will be happy and flourish. And if all it takes is manpower, me as a patient, getting the motivation to get your hands in the dirt and play with the plants, it it brings a quality of life in itself um, that I think shouldn't be underestimated. You know, even if it means just growing a couple herbs or some sunflowers or even bamboo. Um, Cannabis especially, I'm extremely disappointed with what they've done with the amendment. It's not how it was intended, and it's not what me and the people around me voted for. I can say that with certainty and confidence. Um, so to people just getting introduced as patients, I'd like to talk about some of the conditions that you qualify with. I qualified before Amendment 2 when it was epilepsy and muscle spasms, and then they expanded that to terminal patients under the right to try. Uh, but the official qualifying list is cancer, epilepsy, glaucoma, HIV, AIDS, PTSD, ALS, Crohn's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, medical conditions that are similar to the ones that I just said above work. So depending on your physician and the relationship that you have with the physician, as intended by Amendment 2, uh, you may have access to cannabis. So um, it mentions PTSD, for example, of the same kind. You could, some patients could argue that depending on how debilitating um, their mental diagnosis is, they may or may not have that. Like, for example, I don't see Alzheimer's on this list, um, but I would think that it would be similar to um, perhaps PTSD, perhaps ALS. Um, and then with Crohn's disease, you have um, sorry, this morning. You have IBS, IBD with colitis, or without colitis even. And then it goes on to say, but I don't really count this because you need to have one of the previous diagnoses mentioned. Is you need to have, or you can have chronic non-malignant pain caused by a qualifying medical condition or that originates from a qualifying medical condition that persists beyond the usual course of that qualifying medical condition. So I all I can think of is like if you're perhaps recovering from HIV or AIDS, and you still have neuropathy, or you recovered from cancer, you still have neuropathy or something, then that makes sense for sure. Or even other kinds of chronic pain. Um, then so it's fairly open. Really, it's up to the relationship that you have with your doctor and um, also whether or not they're qualified. I can try and be sure to link a list of qualified doctors. The Department of Health hasn't been so great in um, making sure that this is carried out as intended, but they do update every couple weeks. So I'll try and drop that below. Um, I can also uh, include the link for the qualifying conditions just in case I wasn't clear or um, whatever. Um, but finding a doctor that can recommend this plan is really important to this process. I was fortunate and able. Initially, my doctor was a town next door to me. Um, or not very far at all. 20 minute drive. But he's since moved to Orlando. Initially, when I had to see him, I had to see him every 45 days. This was way back when the rules were awful. The first appointment was $150. Um, and then from there, he made it so that follow-ups were 75 because from what I understand, he understood how expensive this whole process was on patients. A lot of us are not well off financially to begin with, and then on top of, you know, a lot of us were slash are going through the process of figuring out what's going on with us. So this takes testing and travel and medication, and it's a lot on somebody. So anything that can be done to help is appreciated. Um, so Dr. Rosado, thank you. If you guys want to contact him, I can try and link his information or his clinic below as well. As far as I know, those prices are similar or haven't changed. So again, that was $150 for my initial appointment, and then follow-ups were $75. Now I believe I only have to see him every 7 months, which is better than a month and a half. You do have to apply for a card once you're added into the registry to utilize dispensaries. Actually, you need to have a card to utilize dispensaries at all now. The Department of Health has slacked very heavily in almost every aspect of this, including the giving of cards. I will say though that I got an email a couple weeks ago saying that my card was accepted. I sent this back in February, by the way. So I sent my initial application in February, and then I sent another one in July, perhaps early August. But then they ended up processing and accepting my first application from almost a year ago. Insane. But so physical cards aren't out yet. In order for you to, unless you were given one from way back when they were doing them, otherwise, if you don't have a card, in the meantime, you have to use the email sent to you, and I believe in the email it says that you know, the directions for use of the email, along with giving them your form of ID, which driver's license, if you're younger, maybe birth certificate. But I would think that if you're a caregiver or something, you'd be fine with just that. But yeah, that's another thing is the caregivers are meant to do a lot more than they are. A lot of patients aren't very functional. Like I said, I'm very fortunate in that I have my youth. But that doesn't last forever. So yeah, I really hope that they get on this, because there's people suffering, there's people dying, and we can't really wait, This is our lives we're talking about. It's lives of family members, it's the lives of lovers, friends. This is us. We have to start taking control of it. So I encourage people to get involved if you aren't already. Start the discussion. I know it can be overwhelming to people that don't like public speaking in the first place. So even just coming out to your family, grandma, here in the South we have lots of elderly people. They're very understanding. A lot of these people understand or can understand that this is just a plant. Very, very safe and beneficial. And remind them that, if it can't help them now, it can help their friends. It can help them later. So yeah, show up at public meetings that are talking about dispensary bans. There's so much more than there needs to be. Any more than zero, honestly, is disgusting. We need to be promoting access, not mitigating it. It's not fair that patients should have to travel or wait for their medicine to show up. Like I said, a lot of these people are very busy or very, you know, they don't have a lot of energy and resources to be doing this. Um, so patients, caregivers, advocates, please stay and start getting involved in your community if you haven't already. Um, Lots of meetings on bans coming up and will continue to be. So it's important to let your voice be heard. They say that for every one person that calls, emails, shows up, whatever, you represent between 100 and 1,000 people. Um, for lawmakers that might be watching this, or people that can contact or are close with lawmakers, please continue to push for patient rights if you haven't already. What's been laid out isn't what was intended. It's been grossly twisted. Not many people are benefiting, and if it continues, there won't be many people benefiting. People will go bankrupt. We'll have a system set up that, has people being paid to watch it, but no one chipping in. There's 20, they say that there's 20% growth every month in the rate in the registry applicants, So I was patient 2000, now they're in 60,000s. And it could easily be 100,000 before the next session starts, in which then they have to add more licenses for dispensaries. This is going a little too fast for how they intended it, I believe. So that might mean that we have to just take control and do what's best for us. It sucks, but people shouldn't have to suffer. People shouldn't have to be losing their livelihood over well-being, especially for something that grows so easily and readily. To law enforcement watching this, I hope that in the future, now including, you can develop relationships with these patients or people that want to do well in the community to help those suffering. See what you can do to help better the environment around them, see what you can do, just to help them. Keep in mind, there's people struggling to get groceries and whatnot. Developing a relationship with your community at this point in time can be very crucial. It could go leaps and bounds. Words I can't come up with words and what it would mean for the social paradigm of things if what I just spoke of were to be the norm. So, everyone, let's try and work together and make for a future that we intended. It's not too late for us to grab a hold of it. In other states and countries, they did not start with the greatest rules on the books. It took work, it took civil disobedience, it took people going through the process, and really showing it for what it is. We have to let them know that we're not happy with this. Like I mentioned initially, this was a constitutional amendment for the people and the patients of Florida, not the politically fortunate. So yeah, let's look forward to 2018. I hope all of you can have a happy holiday, and really focus this new year on what you want to be the change and be that change. Alright, I hope you guys have a great day.